Not sure how to measure your internal communications? Prove the worth of your internal communication strategy with Contact Monkey's email solution, built into Outlook and Gmail. With Contact Monkey, you will be able to track and analyze employee engagement from your inbox. Start measuring email opens, link clicks, location tracking, and various forms of employee feedback, such as Employee Net Promoter Score. To try Contact Monkey's free demo, visit www.contactmonkey.com/ICPro. I'm Sarah Jackson. Welcome to Internal Comms Pro, the podcast. This season, we're closing the gap. I've tracked down the experts that can help us as internal communicators close the gap from where we are now to where we need to be. We're connecting the dots to drive value and lead from the inside out.
It's exciting to be able to be at a time when that connection between communicating with people and delivering a really human-centric employee experience and business outcomes has never been clearer. We have different skills and talents, but to really join together to make a real change, because the bar's been raised. So, and the stakes are just getting higher and higher. So this is really that opportunity to cement the value of internal communications with leadership, and keep the heat on, even though we're tired. This is our time.
That's Victoria Dew, founder of Dewpoint Communications, a firm dedicated to helping companies communicate better with their people every day. Victoria brings over 20 years of global business experience, and she has served as a trusted strategic advisor to dozens of CEOs and executives, from startups to Fortune 500 companies, including eBay and Dell. Today, Victoria shares with us the insights gleaned from her in-depth research on a wide cross-section of industries. She's uncovered new rules of employee experience and communication and has published them all in an official report. We're going over all the highlights, this and much more on today's show.
Hi, my name is Victoria Dew, SCMP. I'm the founder and CEO of Dewpoint Communications, and we help people-powered businesses to communicate better with their employees every day so that they can deliver values-driven employee experience that drives engagement and business results. So just that. I come from, I don't originally come from an internal communications background. So I have kind of a weird background that I think all sort of links up, but my career and my life has been really global. I grew up here actually in Boston, where I am today, and went to school in upstate New York, did my graduate work in London, came back to the US, and actually promptly moved to Hollywood. And my first career was actually in Hollywood. I worked in development and production in feature films, Warner Brothers and Disney, and then shifted to writing and producing nonfiction television programs after that, which we would less kindly call reality television. Eventually, my partner, who was from New Zealand, wanted to go home. So we went back to New Zealand, and I was there for about 11 years. When I got there, I was really very not wanting to be in entertainment anymore. So I was like, well, what do I do? Because sometimes in Hollywood, they make you think that you're not really qualified to do, if you're not a doctor or a lawyer, you try to leave entertainment, you're not really qualified to do anything but maybe sell real estate. So I looked around and I realized there was this profession called communications. And that actually I was perfectly well suited, coming from a sort of writing and logistics and project management background, to do that. And so I built my entire communications career in Wellington, New Zealand, and which is a really exciting place actually to have a career, with a strong focus on internal communications. And I think one of the things that's really remarkable, and then I came back to this country about 5 years ago. And I realized pretty quickly that there's a big difference between corporate New Zealand and corporate America. And that actually what I was used to in terms of working in the internal comms space was a very different context. Internal communications, for a number of reasons, has been a very strategic function, a strategic business function in New Zealand and Australia and other places. And When I came back here, that just really was not quite the case in the United States. I'm really pleased to say, and some of the work in this research we're going to talk about does indicate some really positive changes. But when I realized that, and I realized that I had quite a different perspective, that's when I decided to build my own business so that I could help and support more companies in really empowering and unleashing their people. So that is my company. And then also, I'm really pleased. I'm the proud to be the immediate past chair of the International Association of Business Communicators, IABC. I know a lot of your listeners are members of IABC. And I also hold the SCMP at the end of my name stands for Strategic Communication Management Professional. And I'm really proud of that designation. That certification is actually only available to, you're only eligible to sit the exam after you've demonstrated 11 plus years of experience as a communications professional. There's actually only about 120 of us who hold the SCMP designation in the world. So I hope our ranks are growing, but I'm proud of that as well. And really, it's exciting to be able to be at a time when that connection between communicating with people and delivering a really human-centric employee experience and business outcomes has never been clearer.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you mentioned New Zealand and Australia because our finale episode actually is featuring an internal communicator that lives and works there with her company. And I just interviewed her last night. It's so funny, the time change. I think it was 8 p.m. here, and then it was 10 a.m. the next day there. But I loved their perspective. It's interesting the different perspectives globally that I'm learning too with internal comms. So I love that you bring that and you can bring that today, to our conversation. And you just finished this amazing research project. Tell me about this journey, about the research, and why you decided to take on such an in-depth process and project.
Yeah. Well, so I realized, so I actually, in normal times, I split my time between Boston and Los Angeles. In normal world, I travel 50, 60% of the time and maintain hubs on both coasts. However, obviously, since March, I have been grounded here in Boston and my suitcases are gathering dust in the closet. So I, like many people, kind of found themselves at home in March and April and May. And time kind of, the weeks kind of like ran together. And I was really busy because one of the things I think that's fascinating about this time is, when people find out that you're an expert in employee communications, they're like, what? You know how to do that? Which is kind of funny because it's like this new glamour zone of corporate functions, which is it's funny for those of us that have been doing it a long time and waiting for it to really have its kind of its moment to shine.
Right.
So
We're like the cool kids club now.
yeah,
Everybody wants in. I love it. Yeah.
the braces are off, and it's like the fact that you have like decades of experience doing this is suddenly like it's like being the it girl. And so anyway, I was very, very busy during the spring and summer. And then I kind of looked up, like many of us, sort of like July, August, and I was like, oh. And I've been running my business, honestly, I'll be honest, from my couch, from my coffee table. Because when I settled in, I just put my laptop at my coffee table and I was like, okay, I'm here. And it really wasn't until sometime over the summer that I realized that, like, I'm not going anywhere. Like, I'm not going back to LA. Like, I'm here for kind of the duration, right? And I realized something in the zeitgeist was shifting in general, in terms of like the reality of schools, not, remote learning, and parents realizing September is going to come and they're going to have their kids at home in many cases. And the reality, we started to see companies start to announce remote or remote optional or default to remote through June 2021. I think when that started to happen, something like the penny really dropped for people that like, this is not just a few more weeks. So I actually decided finally that maybe turning my guest bedroom would be into an office would be a good idea. And the thing that I wanted to know that I'd heard so much about was that companies had been doing, and all the research bears out that companies had been doing a really great job communicating about doing internal communications and communicating with their people through the height of that first phase of the pandemic. right? We can't even say through the pandemic because, of course, we're still in it. And the reality is we will be for quite a while. But during those first phase of real crisis, moving everyone home, etc., dealing with that real crisis urgency when it was all brand new, we knew that companies had done that by and large quite well. And then what I wanted to know was, okay, well, now that we're actually staring down the barrel of the next 12 months, well, what are we going to do now? How are companies actually setting themselves up to do this in an ongoing way? So not just how do you manage the logistics of remote work in many cases, but how do you manage the whole employee experience when people are fatigued, when people are run down, when they're juggling a lot of things, when they're trying to manage school and this, and especially, and this is one of the things that we'll talk about more, knowing that there's going to be this time when companies need to shift back into very high gear and hyper growth again. And those people and their ability to really step up to the plate and be very high performing, having gone through all of this, is going to be really challenged. And this connection also, I think, that has always been ignored conveniently. It was easy to ignore it, that employers really do have a responsibility for their employees' well-being. And I think this difference between your work life and your home life and your personal life and your professional life. And I think many of us have always known that these just were, that they informed each other. But the fact is that we always talked about like, bring your whole self to work, but then your whole work moved into your house, and like a house guest just kind of refuses to leave. And we saw a lot of that, the commingling of that, obviously, in kids, Zoom bombing and pets and things like that. We saw that. But the reality is that there has been this shift towards in-employee experience in terms of the relationship of an employer, a company's responsibility to take care of that whole human that works for them. And how do we communicate that and not just story tell, but I don't know who coined it, but just not just storytelling, but story doing, right? And what does that look like for the duration?
So tell me about kind of the research project, the types of companies, how many. Let's kind of set up the administrative part of it. And then I want to get into all of the insights and learnings and findings.
Yeah, I wanted to get a really diverse sample of companies. I didn't want to, we can always go back and kind of drill down more deeply, but I really wanted kind of a nice breadth. So I talked to a whole range. I talked to a dozen leaders and a whole range of different companies, from smallish startups with just a couple hundred employees to very large corporates with 35,000 employees. So all in all, the total number of employees that are impacted by the leaders I spoke to is almost 70,000. So really nice sample size. My background and my work is industry agnostic, so I wanted to make sure this work reflected that as well. So I spoke with healthcare companies, food and beverage, insurance, a nonprofit, transportation, technology and software as a service, or SaaS, life sciences, so that we really had a nice range of companies and experiences. And I wanted to one thing that's really important to me, and this work absolutely bears it out, I think for many internal comms folks, we have this, what has not always been the best partnership with our close cousin, HR or people ops. And I think we've always sort of been these parallel functions that very often obviously work together, but have also not always been able to link arms effectively for the good of the organization, the good of our people. So in this work, I really wanted to blend that between, and I just really feel like now more than ever, that wall, that silo between HR and internal comms is dead. So I talked to about half senior HR leaders, chief human resources officers, chief people officers, heads of employee engagement, talent and culture, business operations, and then also VPs of comms, heads of internal comms, and senior managers and senior directors of internal comms, so that we really got that breadth. And then also a couple cases of senior leader in a technical specialty area. So someone within the business with a strong interest in people performance.
Okay. Well, and I love, part of our collective is people want to hear what other people are doing because sometimes we feel siloed and on islands and that we're doing all this work by ourselves. We have some of our listeners who are one man, one woman type band. So it's always good to kind of see and hear, hey, what is everybody else doing? So I want to start with the positive. What made you feel hopeful when you were interviewing companies? What's going well? What are they doing right? Let's start there.
Yeah. One of the things that was immediately really heartening to me was something I hadn't really seen enough of before, which is people really understood the connection between their people and the bottom line, and could really, in that very clear line of sight of why, how our people are doing, how, what their experience is, and how we're communicating with them affects our bottom line. So, for example, a call center, right? And sometimes, everyone who's ever worked in a company with a call center knows that they can be kind of a sticky wicket in terms of communications. What I heard several times was people really saw that our call center people are that link to customer retention. And that if our call center people are overwhelmed, burnt out, struggling, and those reasons are not able to, and forget that, just like forget sick, right? Forget actually physically sick, because for much of this we're really talking about that psychological, emotional well-being. If they're burnt out and really struggling, that customer experience suffers, which then translates into client retention, customer retention problems. And I heard several times companies really being very, very clear on that. One of the other things in terms of the mix of companies I spoke with, I wanted to make sure we did get that really good representation. I think sometimes we read a lot about tech companies and where everyone's sort of easy to work remotely because they're basically, traditionally desk-based people. But I wanted to make sure we got a mix of not just those traditional corporate desk laptopy people, but call center, laboratory-based teams, frontline employees who may be retail-based, and 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 warehouse workers. So people who may not always be the easiest to communicate with as well, so that we really get that sample. So first, that people really understood, really saw that connection between people and the bottom line, which is hugely encouraging. And the other thing was the link between HR and communications. That when I explained that I was researching employee experience and communications, people's eyes lit up because they realized that those two things are lockstep, and that's new, right?
Okay. So what concerned you or what was the most surprising thing that you gained insight from that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, it's there's so many different things and there's so many different facets. I think one of the things we talk about is in the report is there are some challenges that everyone sees and no one quite has answers to. And some of those things are like no one has really figured out how to do onboarding, right? In an ongoing way for teams that will, in a fully remote environment. We know that those first 6 months of tenure are critical for an employee's long-term retention and performance. And this fact of how are you going to onboard whole cohorts who will never meet in real life, who will be a long time, or won't meet for a long time, and may not meet their manager for a long time, right? So, especially more junior employees who may not have that workplace context, that was something that was concern across the board that no one really had no one really had a really good answer to. The other a solution to the other thing that came up again was just I think what we're hearing again. No one has a viable long-term replacement for face-to-face experiences in terms of collaboration and communication. So obviously we're so fortunate to have so many great digital platforms that try to bridge the gap, and people are doing really creative things in terms of creating connection and community, but no one really has a way to bridge that gap long term for true face-to-face communication.
Right. Well, and I think that's interesting you bring up the onboarding. I know we did an episode last season with Lisa Harwin, who does the internal communications for the Port of Portland. And it
She's
was,
awesome.
yeah, I know. I call her the Martha
I'm a
Stewart
big fan.
of internal comms. I know. And that was a kind of a low hanging fruit type of situation where her team helped HR with creating this wonderful polish on their onboarding strategy. So I think for you to mention that again, it's such a great, I think, place to start if internal communicators are wanting to sort of put the cherry on top of, hey, where can we immediately show values, particularly with the HR team. Wow, what a great place to start in remote onboarding, and how to communicate that and keep people communicating, and all the creativity that can go behind that, particularly in a remote situation.
One of the things I know from Lisa's work is they've always done a really great job with tangible, physical, like not just swag, but like touch points in their employee, like physical things, water bottles, things that people can pick up and touch. And I think that's another thing that's been so important during this time. Think about how much people have always loved getting things in the mail, but now in that onboarding, creating that physical experience of what it's like to join a new company, and the creativity that you mentioned that she's had. But like there's absolutely a trend of direct mail, right, as a communications channel, which we didn't really leverage as well before. But now to get something, a letter, is really special.
Yeah, I think channels that, and this was something I was talking to Lauren Ritchie, our upcoming finale episode. She was saying the same thing, and our whole episode is going to be about decluttering your channel strategy, because some channels that they were using are now not relevant. Some channels like direct mail that they weren't using now are relevant. So I think that is such a key thing, delight and surprise now with mailing, little company magic home, I think is such a great opportunity again for internal communicators to weigh in on. So
that also is consistent with what I heard in a couple of things. One, in terms of digital platforms, and one thing is the connection between either where there had been a digital platform or an app or something that maybe had been struggling with adoption before, suddenly got this big, much needed boost. Also, any platform or any channel that maybe had been in the nice to have basket before for senior leadership suddenly got put front and center. But the other thing I heard was a real willingness to try things, to iterate, to try new channels, to mix and match, and to really respond in real time. I think about it like a VPN token, right? Any of us who've ever had a VPN token, that it's like the numbers change, the code is changing all the time. And I get asked that all the time, like, well, what are the things that managers should be doing to da 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 da? And I'm like, I can't, it's like not a great consultant answer. Like, it depends. But the truth is it does. And it's changing all the time. And what it was 15 minutes ago isn't what it's going to be in 2 weeks.
Now, you cite 3 key messages that you found that everyone's sharing. Go over those for us.
There's a few things that I did hear very consistently. One is this real message about that our employees are critical to our success as a business, and that we need you and support you. Very human-centric messages. Another thing, why across the board, an awareness that this work-life balance thing, whatever that even means anymore, is and is going to continue to be a challenge, and a real willingness to work on solutions to help people succeed in their roles and balance their commitments. And also that this working from home thing is going to require adaptation to the way we work, and a commitment to providing people with the tools that they need to do their job.
Okay. All right. So when you were talking to all of these folks, what looming challenges did you uncover, or blind spots that internal communicators may need to be aware of?
Yep, definitely. Again, the onboarding, that's something that again is going to be an issue. Managers, the manager challenge and opportunity. I think there's a huge opportunity around managers, and their communications, and how to not only support them, but to really enable them to be powerful communicators themselves. And one of the things that was really interesting that I heard was around diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And concerns about that. But it's an interesting context because, like, how do we include anyone now? So there was a new phase of that sort of became sort of almost quite meta in terms of inclusion. But how do you actually make people feel included, part of a team? in a way that is meaningful. One of the other things that actually was, and I think one of the reasons that's interesting is because it kind of opens up, in North America and US, we're very focused on diversity, equity, inclusion in terms of systemic racism and racial injustice. And there were also broader conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion in a broader context, including concern about how neurodiversity might affect inclusion, how people who may not necessarily do that well on Zoom calls all day, every day, and may be responding to isolation in different ways, how we may or may not, the very ways that we have to work now may be creating an environment that's not inclusive. Certainly we see that in a broader context for organizations that may have frontline workers who do live in homes or have homes that have a lot of people that they don't necessarily have a spare bedroom to turn into a home office, may or may not have Wi-Fi in their homes, maybe trying to run meetings from their phones. And so looking at how we're really sensitive to that broader question of what we're asking people to do these days.
That's fascinating. I have not thought about that, but you're right. It is an interesting time, particularly if you live alone, if you don't have children, if you don't have family, but versus, oh, I've got all these kids running around that I'm trying to do school. And it does create certainly an interesting dynamic. So talk about the people that you uncovered that maybe might have emerged as disruptors or innovators. Who is doing, kind of taking this COVID landscape and turning it on its head and making it into a real positive? Did you dig up any stories like that or examples?
There's so many examples of different kinds of companies innovating in different ways that are appropriate for their context. And that's just been so cool to see. One of the things I identified that was really interesting was a sort of sweet spot in what I would call a more mature startup. So maybe Series H, several thousand employees, right? Where they had a head of employee experience and a head of internal communications who were just like joined at the hip and were developing programs, initiatives, and taking really holistic looks at those. I saw a lot of opportunity for and it definitely confirmed my belief that that absolute integration of HR, employee experience. It's interesting. I went to a seminar recently and we're not calling it HR, or what the difference between HR and people ops, and operations as being a much more proactive form. So that where those functions are, I also think there's a whole piece, and this is not covered in this report. I'd like to do more work on it, is that third critical piece, which is obviously digital workplace. So that trifecta of internal communications, IT, and HR, and having an integrated function, right? So certainly there's a lot of opportunity there for innovation. I will say one of the things that was, there were so much of it came to being really audience centric and really audience specific. One of the things that I heard that was surprising was actually from a content creation perspective, two very different approaches. I heard from one organization who was taking their content and making it really snackable, really bite-sized, very small, like telegraphic, almost like Twittery stories content that people could digest easily, but they had a cadence that allowed them to build understanding over time. And then on the other end, an organization who felt like that it was important to have really high quality almost investigative journalism, or quality of Wall Street Journal or New York Times, because we know, a lot of the Edelman research. And one of the other things we did was quite a lot of just desk research, environmental scan of trending business trends and thought leadership and other research. But we know that from the Edelman research that was done this year, that employees really are looking to their employers for credible information. And an organization that felt like having really high quality journalistic content was important. And I just loved that they were both the right solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to really know the audience. That is an interesting perspective.
One of the other things that I heard was companies that were really understanding, and this is innovative, and I think this is something internal comms people have been saying for a while, is really understanding the whole of the employee life cycle. So understanding the communications needs not just of an employee when they are working with you, but even after they exit the company. And examples of how, we know that there were significant furloughs and layoffs over the spring and summer. We know we're probably headed for more of those in the coming quarter. That this understanding that these people that are exiting the company for, through circumstance, we really do want to maintain a connection with them, because it is very likely that we want them to come back soon. And so creating strong alumni networks, maintaining that connection, not just the communication, but tools, resources, and creating community, even for employees who their current status in the employee life cycle is not employed with you. I thought that was really great to see, and I think an innovative approach that I hope we see more and more of. Another, I think, thing that came through was, and I heard even from very, very established corporates, was a shift to really adopting more of a startup mentality and a startup approach. And this call to really iterate quickly in real time, and to fail fast, and to try things. If it doesn't work, to jettison it. This really quick adaptation to being a startup at any size.
Interesting. Well, and coming from that's partly has been my life. I get geeked out about stuff like that, and thinking how to marry being, an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur, with internal comms. There's some interesting and innovative approaches that can be born out of having that sort of mentality. And for, I think, this time in history, internal communicators finally have that freedom now, out of the sheer need to move fast and to test things. Now they've got that environment. So that's interesting that you bring that up, and how exciting. In the report, you also cite early warning indicators and alarm bells. Tell me about this concept and what you found here.
Yeah, this part was really interesting. I wanted to know what was keeping, senior leaders up at night. One of the things was I heard a lot that companies have been doing a lot of surveying of employees in the last 6-8 months, and about how they're doing. I get this, and this is sometimes I think an answer of HR I would get from an HR professional, not necessarily a communications professional. When I ask about voice of the employee, they'll tell me about survey results, right? When you ask voice of the employee from a communications professional, they'll tell you about two-way communication, which I think is always interesting. So in terms of survey results, a couple things that were really interesting there, but one of the things is the concern about, I asked about what are your response rates, 40, 50, 60%. And a concern was, what about the other 40, 50, 60%? What about those lost employees that we're not hearing from? And concern about, where are they? Are they struggling? Are they experiencing housing insecurity? Are they really struggling at home? Are they experiencing food insecurity? And feeling like we don't quite have a great way to connect with them and to really deliver that excellent employee experience for them, although we might like to. Another thing that came again was this tension between this balancing recovery and high growth. So we've had this time now where we've kind of been through this crisis and had to look after people and been really human-centric and very focused on employee well-being. And yet we know that we're going to get into in Q4 2021, and the shift to, we really need to recoup the losses, right, financially, and we really need to move into a very accelerated pace of generating revenue. How will we balance the promise, the culture, the expectations that we've set with employees about flexibility, about employee experience? How will we balance those with the need that we really have to put the pedal to the metal now? And there's a lot of sort of grind that has to happen. How do we do that, especially in the face of ongoing trauma? And the third thing there, I think that's important, is this fear of what I call, what if the hits just keep coming? I think we just don't know what's going to happen next. And so this feeling that the that the ground is going to continue to move underneath our feet. How much can people keep taking, right? Where are those points? And again, how do we balance all of that?
I love that you did this report because I think it also validates things that we might be feeling, particularly if you're putting together a case or trying to educate your own leadership. It's such a good reference point. I'm assuming you're sharing this report out soon and we'll be able to share this with our listeners, correct?
Absolutely. I'm happy to share it. And you know what else can be really helpful is we all know that sometimes when we're internal or in-house, we can jump up and down all day long saying things and leaders don't necessarily listen. But if someone comes in from the outside and presents findings like this to your team and to other executives, it can sound suddenly brand new to them. And so one of the other ways that I'll be using this report is to actually offer those internal briefings for companies so that not only they can access the research, but also to start conversations within organizations about where they are and where they want to be.
I feel like every time we have our return to office guidelines set, there are updates that create more confusion. As your company communicates your new normal, our sponsor, Circle, wants to make distributing and editing your comms as easy as possible. With their new broadcast suite, you can create a unified employee experience across email, intranet, and your mobile app, pretty much wherever your employees are. And if something's changed, you don't have to dig through a dozen channels to correct it. To learn more about creating a simplified cross-channel distribution employee experience, visit circle.com/ICP. That's CERKL.com/ICP. Now, Victoria's report is so in-depth and covers so many key aspects and insights to the new normal. Visit www.internalcommspro.com/show notes. Click on this episode to get a link that will provide you with a copy of her entire report. Now, in this next section, Victoria boils down her research into an aha moment that you don't want to miss, as well as some low-hanging fruit that can serve as quick wins to engage your employees. Now, let's jump back in. I love that. I love that so much. You're such an advocate, too, for our brothers and sisters in this field. So that's why I'm glad you're here talking about this today. So when you take a step back after listening and digesting the information and writing the report down, if you had to boil it down to, one thing that you might believe that internal communicators are missing or they could miss, was there an aha moment or one, like if you could just boil it down into what's one thing that you thought was your personal biggest insight in all this?
Yep. The personal insight is about that what's missing is just really the biggest opportunity. And that is the silo has to die. Like, let 2020 be the year that the silo dies between between communications and HR, people ops. This is a chance to work cross-functionally. And to actually expand not only our capacity, but our capability, our expertise, our skill sets to have a much more integrated approach. And the other side of that is to be really, truly strategic. Because we all know what it's felt like, feeling like you're always chasing your tail, right? And we know that and running around and like it's like whack-a-mole, and it's been whack-a-mole, and it's actually always been whack-a-mole. There have just been more moles this year. But the switch to, okay, let's actually have a strategic approach. And this is what I heard again and again. They said, I just want to be able to take a breath. I just want to take a beat and figure out what we're doing and to be able to look forward and just figure out where we're going. Right. And we've all been asking for that for a long time, because I think the solution to how do we iterate in a very rapid rate in real time is we have a strategic framework. We know where we're going, and we're going to make sure the tactics, whatever they are, align to that big picture. Right. So that opportunity to just really be strategic so that it doesn't feel like the wheels are always about to come off.
Yeah. Well, and to get above the work so that you can take that breath. I think that's the biggest challenge. We've heard from guests that have been on the show and listeners that whether I like it or not, I am now at the leadership table and they're worried of losing the seat now, right? So is there something that a tip or what's, in this podcast, we're always talking about what's one thing to close the gap, to get from here to there. Is there one thing or one tip that you can share to help keep the seat at the table, elevate their status? I know in the report you mentioned some quick wins or low hanging fruit. Talk about that for me.
There are a few things that are just that are quick wins and really great low hanging fruit. One thing is just easy tips. First of all, you're exactly right. We cannot backslide. We've been given this opportunity. We have to keep going. Leaders are used to this now, so we can't let them remember there was ever a time when they thought that internal comms just wasn't that important or that employee experience wasn't that important. So in that vein, make two-way leadership communication like brushing your teeth. Right? One of the things I heard was that employees really liked that they were, for better or for worse, they were having more face time with their CEOs, even via Zoom, right? FaceTime, in air quotes. They were seeing them more, they were hearing from them more, there was more dialogue, there was more discussion. They liked that, they got used to that. So keep that going, keep that momentum going. We all know, we've heard, and a lot of this has been corrected, but not across the board, leaders saying, oh, I don't have anything to say. And a big theme is like talk less, listen more. Like show up, be there with them, let them ask you questions. Personally, in my work, I'm a big fan of what I call two-way ask me anything, which is not just like people asking a CEO something, but CEO asks an employee group a question, and then the employees ask a CEO a question. And that actually, when that goes back and forth, it's actually called a conversation. That's a way. So just keeping that two-way communication going. Another thing, I talk a lot about values, and this came through, that companies that had very clearly embedded and were communicating their values and values as behaviors, had much greater connection, and people had a much greater connection to the work and to the purpose of what they were doing. I call it values IRL, and it's weaving them into everything you do, right? Every single touch point. We know, for example, in terms of values and purpose, that employees, and especially Gen Z, will not work for a company where their values and purpose is not aligned with the employee's personal values and purpose. So there's really not much of an option anymore going forward. So I would just hardwire that into everything you do, starting now. And then finding those lost employees, right? And keeping up with, you said, we did. So when you ask people questions in a survey, making sure you also tell them, like, we heard that you said this, and so we're doing this, or we heard this and we can't do this, but we are doing this. But maintaining that feedback of you said, we did.
Got it. All right. So best idea you uncovered and the biggest learnings that came from that.
Some of this, for example, that whole of employee life cycle really impressed me, because it really showed that connection to, and this kind of goes back to the one thing, the low-hanging fruit that we do to not backslide, keep making it very clear where the return on investment is, right? So you're going to do an alumni program. Why are you going to do that? They don't even work for us. It's because in 6 months, you're going to need to hire those people back, right? You have a bunch of software engineers out there. There's plenty of companies looking for great software engineers. Let's make sure we keep them in our fold so that we can have them back, because it's going to reduce our recruitment costs. It's going to increase retention. And they already know us, right? The onboarding is easier, and they're already going to be high performing. So that was one of the things that I really loved the most. I think the worst idea to generalize was doing nothing, where companies felt, and I just empathize so much, where the idea of taking that strategic approach and being forward looking just felt so overwhelming and impossible to them. And I think we've all felt like that, like kind of like a bug on your back, that to me is the very not good place to be in all this, is doing nothing.
Yeah. All right. So where do we go from here? If you could give our listeners kind of, hey, this is the one thing I should be doing right now to prepare for 2021. what's your advice here to us?
Yeah. Last year, 2019, when we remember when we used to go to conferences and we were like all in person in rooms together. I've been thinking a lot of so crazy. I've been thinking a lot about this at the IABC World Conference in 2019. Peter Sheehan, who's a thought leader that I've just really admired for a long time, was the closing keynote speaker. And one of the things he said that has just stuck with me, and especially this year, was think about how fast, and this is in 2019, think about how fast things are moving now. And I promise you, this is the slowest they're ever going to be. Everything that happens now is only going to be happening faster and in a more accelerated, at a more accelerated rate. And I think that has just never been more true. Like when we think about this year, and 2021 is, I hope it's different, but I don't think it's going to be easier or slower. So being aware that this rapidly accelerating pace of change and needing to iterate and be, I don't want to say agile, but flexible, responsive, fast thinking under a strategic framework is going to be the mandatory, and that your people are counting on that. I talk about how, like, at some point in the future, any business, any company that anything that can be done by machines or robots will be done by machines or robots. That's fine, but it means that the humans that you have working for you are going to need to be really human-y. Like, they're going to need to be like what I call advanced humaning, like really doing things that only humans can do. So that means that employee experience and how we communicate with them is just going to become more and more paramount. So this is really that golden opportunity to, for people, I always say people got to stick together. So for all the people to join forces, and it's kind of like a band of superheroes, right? We have different skills and talents, but to really join together to make a real change, because the bar's been raised. So, and the stakes are just getting higher and higher. So this is really that opportunity to cement the value of internal communications with leadership, and keep the heat on, even though we're tired. This is our time. Right.
Well, I can't thank you enough for leading the charge on it. And I love that you called us now the it girl or the it guy. That makes me so happy. That's going to be my new saying. Like, we're the it girl now. I love it. I love it so much. So if people want to engage you, Victoria, and talk to you and maybe engage your company, how can they get a hold of you? Can they connect with you on LinkedIn? How do we get into your tribe?
Yep. First of all, I obviously just love talking about this stuff. I will talk about this stuff and employee experience engagement and link to anyone all day long that will sit still. So first of all, yes, absolutely connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you, certainly I'll provide a copy of the report to you to share with readers. You can also, it'll be available on my website. You can download it there, and I will link to that. And feel free to reach out to me by email if this work is of interest to you and I know how to have a broader conversation. Or if you know that there's a leader in your organization who really needs to hear this, right? And having someone else tell them would make your job a whole lot better. Please feel free to reach out.
All right. And give us your website one more time. Where can we go find you?
www.dewpointcoms.com.
All right. Well, thank you, Victoria. I can't thank you enough for all your work, blazing the trail out there for us, and stay connected with us. I'm sure we'll be, talking to you soon as we truck through these trenches in 2021.
Great to be with you, Sarah.
To get a copy of Victoria's in-depth insights, visit internalcommspro.com/show notes to get a link to download her full report. Stay with us as our journey to closing the gap continues next week.
Internal Comms Pro, the podcast, is produced by Super Awesome Media. Our theme music is Big Vision by Purple Planet Music. Don't forget to visit www.internalcommspro.com/show notes for our free resource guides. Thank you for listening.